The boardroom was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the sound of Elena Vasquez's own heartbeat thundering in her ears. 12 faces stared at her from across the polished obsidian table. 12 investors worth a combined $47 billion. And every single one of them looked at her like she was already guilty. Dr. Vasquez. The voice belonged to Victor Chen, co-founder of Nexus Dynamics, the man who had personally recruited her 3 years ago. His tone was measured, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. The files were accessed from your terminal, your credentials, your biometric signature. At 3:17 in the morning, 2 nights before the most important product launch in this company's history. Eleanor's throat tightened. That's impossible. I wasn't here at 3 in the morning. The security footage shows the lab empty, Victor continued, sliding a tablet across the table. But the access logs don't lie. Someone used your identity to download the complete schematics for Kinetic Core. Every circuit, every algorithm, every proprietary element of the technology you built. She looked at the tablet, her name, her timestamp, her digital fingerprint on a betrayal she didn't commit. I didn't do this. Then who did? The question came from the far end of the table, and Elena's stomach dropped when she saw who asked it. Marcus Cole. He sat there in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Marcus Cole, the company's golden boy, their other lead engineer, the man whose charm had won over every investor in this room, while Eleanor had been buried in the lab, actually building the technology that would change the world. The man she was certain had been stealing her work for months. I think we all know who benefits from this, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Someone who's been watching my progress. Someone who's had access to my research. Someone who... Careful. Victor's interruption was soft but sharp. Accusations require evidence, Dr. Vasquez. Right now, the only evidence points to you. The room seemed to close in around her. 3 years of 18-hour days. 3 years of sacrificing everything. Relationships, health, sanity, to build something that could revolutionize how cities stored and distributed energy. 3 years of being overlooked and underestimated, while Marcus Cole smiled for cameras and took credit for collaborative breakthroughs. And now, 6 days before Kinetic Core was supposed to change everything, someone had made sure it would destroy her instead. The launch is in less than a week, one of the investors said. If these schematics are already in a competitor's hands, they're not. Eleanor's voice cut through the murmuring. I would know if someone had replicated my work. The core technology requires manufacturing tolerances that don't exist outside this building. Whoever took those files can't actually build Kinetic Core. Not yet. Then why steal them? Marcus asked, and there was something in his voice, something that sounded almost like genuine curiosity. Eleanor met his gaze. To make sure I can't either. 48 hours earlier, Elena's world had still made sense. The underground lab in Brooklyn's Navy Yard was her cathedral. 30,000 square feet of precision equipment, prototype stations, and the quiet hum of machines that understood her better than any person ever had. She stood before the Kinetic Core prototype, a cylinder roughly the size of a refrigerator. Its surface covered in interlocking geometric panels that shifted and rotated in response to external forces. Inside, a network of flywheels, magnetic bearings, and proprietary mechanical linkages could capture, store, and release energy with an efficiency that made lithium batteries look like children's toys. 94% conversion efficiency, she murmured, reading the latest test results on her tablet. 94%. For context, the best commercial energy storage systems operated at around 70% efficiency. Every percentage point above that represented billions of dollars in value. Elena had just added 24 percentage points. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Because the last time she'd been this close to a breakthrough, people had died. The memory hit her without warning, as it always did. The Phoenix facility. The smell of burning insulation. The screams had stopped too suddenly. 2 technicians, James Morrison and David Park, who had trusted her calculations, trusted her design, trusted her. And she had failed them. And the official investigation had blamed a manufacturing defect, a microscopic flaw in a bearing assembly that had caused catastrophic failure during a stress test. Eleanor had been cleared of wrongdoing, but the industry had a long memory. She'd spent 2 years unable to find work, watching her reputation crumble, wondering if she'd ever build anything again. Then Victor Chen had appeared like a guardian angel, offering her a position at Nexus Dynamics, a chance to start over. He'd believed in her when no one else would. At least, that's what she'd told herself. Burning the midnight oil again. Eleanor spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the emergency shutdown panel. Marcus Cole stood in the doorway, his white lab coat pristine despite the late hour, a coffee cup in each hand. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I work here, remember? Co-lead engineer on the Kinetic Core project. The project I designed, the project I built, the project you've contributed exactly what to, exactly." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been hurt or might have been anger. "I brought you coffee," he said quietly. "Ethiopian single origin, the kind you like." He set the cup on a workbench near the door, then turned and left without another word. Eleanor stared at the coffee for a long moment. How did he know what kind she liked? She'd never told him. She'd never told anyone here anything personal. That was the point. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. And not anymore. Not after Phoenix. She left the coffee untouched and went back to work. The morning of the security breach, Eleanor had been in Victor's office for what she'd thought was a routine pre-launch meeting. Victor Chen was 63 years old, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of distinguished appearance that made investors feel safe. He'd built Nexus Dynamics from nothing, transforming it from a small engineering consultancy into a robotics and energy startup valued at over $2 billion. He was brilliant, connected, and had shown Eleanor nothing but kindness since the day he'd hired her. Which was why she didn't understand the look on his face when she walked in. "Eleanor," he gestured to a chair, "please, sit down." "Is something wrong? The prototype metrics are extraordinary. That's not why I called you here." Victor folded his hands on his desk, a gesture she'd seen him use in negotiations when he was about to deliver bad news. "There's been a breach." The word hit her like ice water. "What kind of breach?" "Someone accessed the Kinetic Core files last night. The complete technical package, schematics, algorithms, and manufacturing specifications, everything." Eleanor's mind raced. "That's impossible. The files are air-gapped. They're not connected to any external network. Someone would have to physically access the secure terminal and—" "They did." Victor turned his monitor to face her. "Using your credentials." She looked at the log, her name, her access code, her biometric signature, a timestamp of 3:17 a.m. "I wasn't here last night. I left at 11. I went home. Or I was asleep." "Can anyone verify that?" The question was soft, almost apologetic, but it still cut. Because of course no one could verify it. Elena lived alone. She had no friends, no partner, no one who would notice if she disappeared at 3 in the morning. She'd designed her life that way. Isolation was protection, relationships were vulnerabilities. She'd learned that lesson at Phoenix, where trusting the wrong people had led to— "I didn't do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe you." Victor's response was immediate, and something in Elena's chest loosened slightly. "But the board won't. Not without another explanation, and right now, we don't have one." "Then find one. Check the cameras. Check the other access logs. And someone spoofed my credentials. That's the only explanation. Our security team is investigating, but Elena—" Victor paused, and for the first time, she saw genuine concern in his eyes. "I have to ask, is there anyone who might want to frame you? Anyone with both the motive and the technical capability?" The answer came instantly, even though she didn't say it out loud. Marcus Cole. He had access to the lab. He had access to her work. He'd been hovering around her projects for months, asking questions, observing her methods, always with that charming smile that made everyone else trust him completely. Everyone except Eleanor. "I need to check something," she said, standing abruptly. I need to go through the prototype logs. If someone's been accessing my work without authorization, Elena. Victor's voice stopped her at the door. More, be careful. If you're right, if someone is targeting you, then they've already proven they're willing to destroy your career to get what they want. Don't give them any more ammunition. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left. The next 16 hours were a blur of forensic analysis and growing paranoia. Elena went through every access log, every security camera, every digital footprint in the Nexus Dynamics system. What she found made her blood run cold. Someone had been accessing her files for months. Small intrusions, barely noticeable, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. Always during times when Eleanor was known to be in the building, always using her credentials, always careful to leave no obvious trace. But traces existed if you knew where to look. And the pattern led directly to Marcus Cole's workstation. Son of a bitch, Eleanor breathed, staring at her screen. You've been stealing from me this whole time. She didn't have proof. Not yet. The intrusions were sophisticated enough that she couldn't definitively tie them to Marcus's access codes. But she knew it in her bones. The question was what to do about it. Going to Victor would require evidence she didn't have. Going to the board would make her look desperate, vindictive, paranoid, all the things people had called her after Phoenix. And going to Marcus directly would only give him the chance to cover his tracks. No, she needed to handle this herself. She needed to catch him in the act. If stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed, because the next one might cut even deeper. The gala was Victor's idea. A pre-launch celebration for investors, partners, and media was held in the penthouse of a midtown tower that offered panoramic views of Manhattan's glittering skyline. 200 of the most powerful people in tech gathered in one room to toast the future of energy storage. And Elena felt like a fraud walking through the door. She'd spent an hour choosing her dress, a deep blue sheath that she hoped said confident engineer rather than desperate imposter. She'd spent another hour practicing what to say when people asked about Kinetic Core, about the launch, about her plans for the future. She hadn't planned for how to act when she saw Marcus Cole holding court by the windows, surrounded by investors who hung on his every word. The efficiency gains alone are revolutionary, Marcus was saying, his voice carrying across the room. We're not just improving existing technology, we're fundamentally reimagining how cities can capture and utilize kinetic energy from everyday motion. Footsteps, vehicle vibration, structural flex, all of it converted and stored with unprecedented efficiency. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides, her words, her vision, her technology. And there was Marcus, delivering it like he'd invented it himself. Dr. Vasquez. A voice beside her made Eleanor turn, a woman she didn't recognize. Early 50s, elegant grey suit, sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'm Catherine Moore, Chief Technical Advisor for Meridian Energy. I've read your published work on mechanical energy conversion. Fascinating stuff. Thank you. Eleanor forced a smile. Are you considering Kinetic Core for Meridian's grid projects? I'm considering a lot of things. Catherine's gaze drifted toward Marcus. Your colleague is quite the salesman. But I've been in this industry long enough to know the difference between the person who sells the vision and the person who builds it. Something in the woman's tone made Eleanor pay closer attention. And which one are you here to meet? The builder. Catherine smiled slightly. Walk with me, Dr. Vasquez. There's something I think you should know. They moved to a quieter corner of the penthouse, away from the crowd. Through the windows, Eleanor could see the lights of Times Square pulsing in the distance. I did some research before coming tonight, Catherine said, not just on Kinetic Core, on you, your career, your setback. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Phoenix. Phoenix, Catherine nodded. 2 technicians dead. A prototype failure that was blamed on manufacturing defects. An investigation that cleared you of wrongdoing but destroyed your reputation anyway. She paused. What do you remember about the consulting firm that handled the failure analysis? Eleanor frowned, trying to recall details she'd tried so hard to forget. Chen Industrial Consulting. They were brought in by the insurance company to... She stopped. Chen. Victor Chen was the lead consultant on the Phoenix investigation, Catherine said quietly. His report was the one that officially attributed the failure to manufacturing defects. His report was the one that cleared you of negligence. He never mentioned. Elena's mind was spinning. He recruited me. After Phoenix, when no one else would hire me, Victor gave me a second chance. Why wouldn't he mention that he'd worked on the investigation? That's an excellent question. Catherine reached into her jacket and produced a small envelope. This is a copy of the original failure analysis report, the one Chen submitted to the insurance company. I obtained it through unconventional channels. I think you should read it carefully, especially the section on root cause determination. Eleanor took the envelope with trembling hands. Why are you giving me this? Because I've seen what happens when brilliant engineers get caught in the crossfire of corporate politics, and because something about your situation doesn't add up. Catherine glanced toward the crowd, where Victor was now standing with Marcus, both of them laughing at something an investor had said. Be careful, Dr. Vasquez. The people who smile the warmest often have the coldest intentions. She disappeared into the crowd before Eleanor could ask any more questions. Eleanor didn't open the envelope at the gala. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking too badly, her mind racing too fast. She smiled through 3 more hours of small talk and investor questions, then fled the moment it was socially acceptable to leave. Back in her apartment, a sparse, functional space in Brooklyn Heights that she'd chosen for its proximity to the lab rather than its comfort, she spread the documents across her kitchen table and began to read. The failure analysis report was 37 pages of technical jargon, stress calculations, and material specifications. But buried in the middle, and in a section labeled Alternative Hypotheses Considered and Rejected, Eleanor found something that stopped her heart. A note, handwritten in the margin, in Victor Chen's distinctive script. Sabotage scenario consistent with evidence. Recommend attributing to a manufacturing defect per client instructions. Client instructions. Someone had told Victor to cover up the real cause of the Phoenix failure. Someone had wanted Eleanor blamed, wanted her discredited, wanted her destroyed, and Victor Chen had helped them do it. But why? What could anyone possibly gain from the patent filing dates? Eleanor lunged for her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She pulled up the patent database, searched for her name, and searched for the dates around the Phoenix incident. And there it was. 3 weeks after the explosion that killed James Morrison and David Park, a patent had been filed for a mechanical energy conversion system. The concepts were familiar, too familiar. They were her concepts, her early work on what would eventually become Kinetic Core. But the inventor's name on the patent wasn't Elena Vasquez. It was Marcus Cole. No, she breathed. No. She kept searching. More patents, all filed during the 2 years Elena had been blacklisted from the industry. All based on her research. All filed by Marcus Cole. And the assignee, the company that owned the rights to all of them, was a shell corporation that, when Elena traced the ownership records through 3 layers of holding companies, led back to a single name. Victor Chen. The revelation rewrote everything Eleanor thought she knew. Victor hadn't saved her. He'd exploited her. He'd sabotaged Phoenix, destroyed her reputation, stolen her early work. And then, when enough time had passed, when she was desperate enough to accept any opportunity, he'd recruited her to finish building the technology he'd already patented. She was his employee, working to commercialize her own stolen inventions. And Marcus Cole wasn't just a rival engineer. He was Victor's partner in the theft. Unless... Eleanor's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Alone. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., Brooklyn Bridge Park, the pier. Don't tell anyone. It's about Victor. She stared at the message for a long moment. It could be a trap. It could be Victor, trying to figure out how much she knew. It could be Marcus, playing some new angle in whatever game they were running. Or it could be someone who had answers. She texted back a single word. Fine. Then she spent the rest of the night making copies of everything she'd found, encrypting them and hiding them in places no one would think to look. Because if Victor Chen had been willing to kill 2 people to steal her work once, there was nothing stopping him from doing it again. The pier was nearly empty at 7 in the morning, just a few joggers and early morning commuters cutting through the park. Eleanor stood at the railing, watching the East River flow past, her hands buried in the pockets of her coat and her heart pounding. "You came." She spun around. Marcus Cole stood 10 feet away, his hands raised slightly, as if to show he meant no harm. "You." Elena's voice was ice. What the hell do you want?" "To help you." "Help me?" She laughed bitterly. "You've been stealing my work for years. You filed patents on my research. You're Victor's partner in—" "I'm not his partner." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Elena, please, I know what you found last night. I know about the Phoenix report, the patents, all of it. But you don't have the whole picture. Then enlighten me." Marcus glanced around, checking that they were alone. "Victor recruited me the same way he recruited you, 8 years ago, right out of my PhD program. He saw potential, offered me a position, and made me feel like the most brilliant person in the world. And then he started filing patents in my name, patents for work I didn't do. Your name is on those filings, because he put it there, as a shield. And if anyone ever investigated, he wanted someone else to take the fall, someone young and ambitious and desperate enough to accept opportunities without asking too many questions." Marcus's jaw tightened. "By the time I realized what was happening, I was in too deep. My entire career was built on intellectual property that Victor controlled. If I exposed him, I'd destroy myself." Elena wanted to believe it was a lie. It would be so much easier if Marcus was simply a villain, simply an enemy she could fight. But something in his eyes told her he was telling the truth. "Why reach out now?" she asked. "Because the launch is in 4 days. And once Kinetic Core goes public, Victor will have everything he needs. The technology you built, the patents I filed, the investor money he's been courting for years. He'll be worth billions. And we'll both be expendable. We? You think he's going to share credit with either of us?" Marcus shook his head. "He's already laying the groundwork to push you out. The security breach, that wasn't to steal your designs. They were already stolen. It was to discredit you, to make the board lose confidence in you. By the time Kinetic Core launches, Victor will have convinced everyone that you're a liability, that the real genius behind the technology was him all along." Elena's hands clenched at her sides. "And you? What's your role in all this?" "I'm supposed to be the new you, the brilliant young engineer who steps in to save the day after you've been removed. Except—" Marcus paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I don't want to be Victor's puppet anymore. I've spent 8 years hating myself for what I've let him do. And when I realized what he did to you, what he did at Phoenix, I knew I couldn't stay silent." "You knew about Phoenix?" "Not until recently, not until I started digging." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. "This contains everything, internal emails, financial records, and the original research files that prove those patents were based on your work. It's enough to destroy Victor, but it's also enough to destroy me." He held out the drive. Eleanor stared at it like it was a live grenade. "Why would you give me this?" "If it incriminates you too, because I'm tired." The words came out with a weariness that seemed bone deep. "I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of watching brilliant people get destroyed while Victor gets richer." Marcus met her eyes. "And because you were right about me. And I have been watching you. I have been studying your work, but not to steal it, to protect it. Every time Victor tried to access your files, I redirected the traces to look like they came from you. I thought I was helping by muddying the waters. Instead, I just gave him more ammunition to frame you." Elena processed this information, turning it over in her mind, looking for holes, looking for lies. She found none. "Even if I believe you," she said slowly, "what exactly do you expect me to do with this?" "Expose him, before the launch, before he has the power and resources to bury this forever." Marcus stepped closer. "You're the only one who can, Elena. You're the one he wronged the most. You're the one the world needs to hear from. The world doesn't care about corporate theft. They'll call it a business dispute. And bury it in legal filings, let Victor's PR team spin it into nothing. Not if people died." Marcus's voice dropped. "Phoenix wasn't just about patents. It was murder, Elena. Victor sabotaged that prototype, knowing it would fail catastrophically. He wanted those deaths. He wanted you destroyed so completely that no one would ever question the ownership of your ideas. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. He killed them. The evidence is on that drive. Emails discussing the necessary sacrifice. Payment records to a contractor who specialized in industrial sabotage. Everything you need to prove that James Morrison and David Park didn't die because of a manufacturing defect. They died because Victor Chen decided they were acceptable collateral damage. The pier seemed to spin around her. Elena grabbed the railing for support, her breath coming in short gasps. For 3 years, she'd carried the guilt of those deaths. She'd replayed the accident 1,000 times, wondering what she could have done differently, what calculations she'd missed, what oversights had cost 2 men their lives. And all along, it had never been her fault. It had been murder. She took the drive. What else could she do? Back in her apartment, Eleanor locked every door, closed every blind, and began to work her way through the files. What she found was worse than anything Marcus had described. Victor Chen hadn't just sabotaged Phoenix, he'd been running the same playbook for decades. 11 engineers over 23 years. All of them are brilliant. All of them vulnerable in some way. Immigrants without connections. Women in a male-dominated field, people recovering from personal tragedies who needed a second chance. Victor had recruited them, extracted their best ideas, filed patents in other people's names, and then found ways to destroy them when they were no longer useful. 3 had died in accidents, 2 had committed suicide, the rest had been discredited, blacklisted, and driven out of the industry. Eleanor was supposed to be number 12, and the launch of Kinetic Core, her technology, her life's work, was going to be Victor's crowning achievement. The moment when everything he'd stolen became legitimate, untouchable, his. Unless she stopped him. The next 3 days were a blur of planning, preparation, and paranoid caution. Elena and Marcus met in secret, always in different locations, always careful to leave no digital trail. And they assembled their evidence, organized it into a narrative that even the most skeptical journalist couldn't dismiss. They reached out to Catherine Moore, who turned out to have her own reasons for wanting to see Victor Chen exposed. Her sister had been one of the engineers he'd destroyed 15 years earlier. But as the launch date approached, Victor began to move against them. The board called an emergency meeting, Marcus told her on the morning of day 2. They're considering removing you from the project entirely. Victor's been telling them you've become emotionally unstable since the security breach. He's recommending a psychiatric evaluation before you're allowed back in the lab. Eleanor felt a cold fury building in her chest. Of course he is. That's his playbook, isn't it? And make the victim look crazy so no one believes them when they speak up. The meeting is tomorrow afternoon. If they vote to remove you, you'll lose access to everything. The lab, the prototype, the files. Then we move faster. Eleanor pulled out her phone. I've been in contact with a journalist at TechCrunch. She's willing to run the story, but she wants corroboration, independent verification of the documents. I can provide that. But Elena, Marcus hesitated. There's something else. Victor knows we've been meeting. Her blood ran cold. How? I don't know, but this morning he called me into his office. He didn't accuse me of anything directly, but the way he looked at me. The things he said. Marcus's voice was strained. He knows Elena, and he's planning something. I can feel it. Then we don't have until tomorrow. We have until tonight. The plan was desperate, risky, and probably insane. But it was the only option they had left. That evening, while Victor hosted a final pre-launch dinner for key investors, Elena and Marcus would access the Nexus Dynamics secure server and download every piece of evidence they needed. Then they would transmit it to Catherine Moore, the TechCrunch journalist, and 3 other media contacts simultaneously. By morning, the world would know who Victor Chen really was. If everything went right, if nothing went wrong, if Victor didn't catch them first. The Nexus Dynamics building was quiet when Elena arrived at 9 o'clock. Most of the staff had been given the night off before the launch, and the security team was running on a skeleton crew. She used her credentials to access the parking garage, praying they hadn't been revoked yet. They hadn't. Marcus met her in the stairwell on the 4th floor. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "The server room is on 6, he said. "I can get us past the biometric locks, but once we're inside, we'll have maybe 15 minutes before the security system registers an anomaly." 15 minutes is enough. Elena checked her bag, confirming she had the portable drives, the signal booster, and the encrypted transmitter. "Let's go." They climbed the stairs in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor found herself thinking about James Morrison and David Park, about their families, their dreams, the futures they would never have. She thought about all the other engineers Victor had destroyed, all the brilliance he had stolen, and all the lives he had crushed in his relentless pursuit of wealth and power. And she thought about her mother, who had died when Elena was 16, who had told her with her last breath, "Never let anyone steal your light, Miha. The world needs what you have to give." She hadn't listened. She'd let Victor dim her light, convince her she was broken, convince her she couldn't be trusted. Not anymore. The server room was cold and humming with the quiet power of 1,000 machines. Blue lights blinked in the darkness as Elena and Marcus made their way to the main terminal. "I'll handle the downloads," Marcus said, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. "You set up the transmitter." Elena nodded, pulling the equipment from her bag. And the transmitter was a custom design, something she'd built herself in the hours since deciding on this plan. It would broadcast the files to 4 separate destinations simultaneously, using a signal pattern that couldn't be traced or blocked. 7 minutes in, they were halfway done. 10 minutes in, they had almost everything. 12 minutes in, the lights came on. "I had a feeling you'd try something like this." Eleanor spun around. Victor Chen stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. His expression was calm, almost amused, like a cat watching mice it had already caught. "Victor," Marcus stepped in front of Elena. "It's over. We know everything. The patents, Phoenix, all of it. By morning, you'll both be in custody for corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy." Victor stepped into the room, his shoes clicking against the tile floor. "Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies, Marcus? Did you really think I'd let 2 children dismantle everything I've built?" "You killed them," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with rage. "James and David, you murdered them to steal my work. I acquired valuable intellectual property through strategic resource management." Victor's smile never wavered. "Those technicians were collateral damage in a necessary operation, just as you will be if you don't cooperate." "Cooperate? The launch is tomorrow. Kinetic Core will revolutionize the energy industry. And you, Elena, will stand on that stage and present it as the triumph of Nexus Dynamics innovation, just as we planned." Victor's eyes were cold. "You'll smile for the cameras. You'll thank me for believing in you when no one else would. And then you'll quietly resign, citing personal reasons, and disappear from the industry forever. And if I refuse? Then I'll release evidence that you were the one who sabotaged Phoenix, that you killed those technicians to cover up your own failures, that you've been mentally unstable for years, a danger to everyone around you." Victor tilted his head. "Who do you think people will believe, Elena? The respected founder of a billion-dollar company, or the disgraced engineer who was blamed for 2 deaths?" Elena's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to scream, to throw herself at Victor and make him pay for everything he'd done. But she had learned something in the years since Phoenix. And sometimes the greatest act of strength wasn't fighting, it was waiting. "You're right," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "No one would believe me." Victor's smile widened. "I'm glad you understand. But they might believe this." She pressed a button on the transmitter hidden in her pocket. Nothing visible happened. But Eleanor knew that at that moment 4 separate media outlets were receiving the complete package of evidence. Emails, financial records, the original failure analysis report, everything. Victor's smile faltered. "What did you just do?" "What you taught me to do." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "I planned for contingencies." The next 12 hours were chaos. By midnight, TechCrunch had published the first story. By 3 in the morning, TCNN was running segments with titles like "Tech Founder Accused of Murder and Patent Theft." By dawn, Victor Chen's face was on every news channel in the country, and federal investigators were arriving at Nexus Dynamics with warrants. The board meeting that was supposed to remove Elena never happened. Instead, the board spent the morning in emergency session, trying to figure out how to save a company whose founder was being arrested for murder. They couldn't. By noon, Nexus Dynamics stock had collapsed. By evening, Victor Chen was in custody, facing charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. And Elena Vasquez was standing in the Brooklyn lab, staring at the kinetic core prototype, trying to process everything that had happened. Elena, she turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, looking as exhausted as she felt. "The launch is cancelled," he said, "obviously, but the technology, it's still yours. The patents Victor filed are being invalidated. The original ownership rights will revert to you. What about you?" Marcus shrugged. "I'll probably face charges for my role in the patent fraud. I've already talked to a lawyer. We're working out a cooperation agreement." "I'm sorry. Don't be." He offered a small, sad smile. "I did what I did. I should have stopped Victor years ago. It's what I deserve." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The technology is too important to let it die. Kinetic core could change the world. The real world, not Victor's version of it. I'm going to need help rebuilding. Someone who understands the systems, the infrastructure, the compromises that have to be made." Marcus's eyes widened. I'm offering you a job, a real job, with real credit for real work." Eleanor held out her hand. "If you're interested." Marcus stared at her hand as if it were a foreign object. Then slowly he reached out and shook it. "I don't deserve this. Maybe not. But my mother used to say that people aren't defined by their worst moments. They're defined by what they do after." Eleanor released his hand. "So let's see what you do after." 6 months later, the kinetic core launch finally happened. Not in a Manhattan penthouse, not with billionaire investors sipping champagne, but in a community center in the Bronx, where the prototype system was being installed to provide clean, efficient energy to a neighborhood that had been underserved for decades. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd of engineers, activists, journalists, and ordinary people who had come to witness something that felt, for once, genuinely hopeful. 3 years ago, she began, I believed my career was over. I believed I was broken, dangerous, incapable of building anything without destroying it. I spent years punishing myself for a failure that, I now know, was never my fault. She paused, collecting herself, but the real failure, my real failure, was believing that I had to carry everything alone. Asking for help was a weakness. That trusting other people would only lead to more pain. She glanced at Marcus, who stood near the back of the room. I was wrong. The technology you see behind me isn't the work of one person. It's the result of collaboration, trust, and the willingness to believe that most people, given the chance, I will choose to do the right thing. The crowd was silent, hanging on her words. Kinetic core can change how cities work. It can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, make clean energy accessible to communities that have been left behind, and create a future that's more sustainable and more just. But technology alone can't save us. Only people can do that. Only by choosing to see each other clearly, to trust each other, to lift each other, can we build the world we actually want to live in. She pressed a button on the podium. Behind her, the kinetic core prototype hummed to life, its geometric panels shifting and rotating as it began to capture energy from the vibrations of the crowd itself. This is just the beginning, Elena said, and I can't wait to see where we go from here. Later that night, after the speeches and the celebrations and the countless interviews, Elena found herself alone on the roof of her apartment building, looking out at the lights of New York City. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Today was good. Thank you for giving me a chance. She smiled and typed back, thank you for earning it. Then she put the phone away and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of having all the answers or solving all the problems. Not the peace of being safe from all harm, but the peace of knowing that she had faced the worst parts of herself, the fear, the paranoia, the desperate need for control, and come out the other side, the peace of knowing that she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. The city hummed below her, millions of lives intersecting in ways she would never fully understand. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with the same fears she had faced. Somewhere out there, people were wondering if they could ever trust again, ever build again, ever believe that their work could matter. And somewhere out there, a technology she had built, a technology she had almost let someone steal, was beginning to change the world. Elena took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then she went back inside to get some sleep. Tomorrow there will be more work to do. If this story reminded you that even our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths, make sure you're subscribed, because the next one might change how you see everything.